Okay, well, we're here to talk a little bit this morning about the evaluation process, and really as we've moved into the next wave of the projects, y'all notice that the evaluation on the project manager has changed a little bit. That category has been set up in the 1 to 5 category, and there's been more emphasis put on that project management, and of course we've instilled the new evaluation process over the past year and a half. So with that, we'll begin. Lacey's going to begin by talking through some of those issues that we've had.
So first, what's the purpose of the prime provider evaluation? I think a lot of us know kind of what that purpose is, but so of course it's to provide feedback back and forth, both positive and constructive, and to make sure that past performance is part of the procurement process, knowing that it's part of that procurement process. So we have to have those conversations back and forth. It also facilitates a conversation, so it should be something that doesn't just happen on the back end. It needs to be something that happens on the front end. And you establish those expectations at the beginning with a conversation. It needs to be surrounded by your scope, your fee, and your schedule to make sure that you're having those conversations back and forth to provide that feedback constantly. And it should definitely not be the first time. So when you do an evaluation at the tail end upon a milestone, it should never be the first time that consultant hears your feedback. It should be conversations on the front end and establish those over time, and then you wrap it up on paper. So when are evaluations performed? So there's a standard kind of out there that you do it annually. That's kind of a minimum. But best practices is you do it, of course, annually, but you also want to do it at the completion of a work authorization and or contract. You also want to do it when there's a PM change, and that's on both sides. If there's a TxDOT PM change, go ahead and wrap it up with an evaluation and then move on to the next PM. If there's a consultant PM change, you're going to want to do it then as well because it closes out that consultant PM and you start with a fresh one. At significant milestones, your 30, 60, 90, or wherever you feel like there's a significant milestone, maybe it's not actually noted in the contract or the work authorization, but you collectively feel that it's a milestone that can be evaluated. And then you also want to do it if there's either any issues or problems that are arising, but you also want to do it during outstanding performance. If you really feel like that consultant is performing above and beyond, go ahead and knock that evaluation out with high scores, and it will boost their average. So how long has the procurement process been in place? It started April 2018. And since then, there's been over 2,000 evaluations. And so this last procurement wave, PEPS felt like there were enough evaluations to start pulling that data and applying it to the procurement. So you have seen that in this last wave.
Okay, so just to move a little further into the process, we're going to talk about some challenges and really some discussion areas, and we're going to have to squeeze it together on the mic to get all this through. But we came up with some issues that we saw talking about the evaluation process and really the consistency. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the findings were when Lacey and I dug into this. So really the first question is, how do you get evaluations that are consistent between districts and really person to person within a district, and how is this being addressed? And with that, Lacey, if you can kind of explain how you're controlling that within the Dallas district.
So the first thing that everybody needs to know is there is training through PEPS statewide to kind of help guide a PM through the evaluation process. There are statewide expectations that define what those criteria are, and also which score, the 1 through 5, and what it means. However, there are lots of different expectations and lots of different results out of these evaluations. And so in Dallas, we knew there was going to be inconsistencies even amongst our districts, so we actually created an SOP for that, and I'll go over that SOP at the end. But you do need to set those expectations early on, have those conversations, and then make sure that at the tail end, when you're doing those evaluations, that there is a good deal of justification associated with each one, with each criteria. So it justifies whether you're going to leave that base, which that base in Dallas is a 3. So 3 is a meeting your expectation. Anything above or beyond that needs to be justified one way or the other so that there's documentation. It's just like you treat it just like you have an employee evaluation. So here's an example of an evaluation. You've got your criteria, then you have your raw score. And so what we decided to do, James and I, we decided to pull some data from PSCAMs. And so we're going to focus on the raw score. So it's kind of hard to aggregate all the data because there's a lot of math on the back end, but we want to focus on the column with the raw scores. So every PM has to put these raw scores in associated with the criteria. So what we did is we took data from a single firm since the beginning of the PSCAM's evaluation process, and we looked at data for a single PM, firm PM for that firm. And we pulled the data for 8 different districts. So these are the results. So the district name and the score is there. So what you can see is the pink district, on average for a single PM, scored a 3 for that PM score, which is very average. So that could mean there could be some 2s or there could be some 4s, but generally speaking, you're at a 3. But the purple district is hovering around 4.9, which is pretty much the max. So then I'm thinking, well, why? Why is that PM scored at a 5? Are they really exceeding those expectations every single time? And is there justification associated with that? So we did the same thing, again, one firm since the creation of the evaluation system for all firm PMs for that firm, because we wanted to see what this looked like. So that would be the last column in this table. So the blue district seems to be pretty consistent from looking at a singular PM to all PMs, 3.4 to 3.21. And the purple district, again, not just for one PM, but for all PMs are hovering near the 5 mark. So again, you ask, why? Why is it a 5 all the time, or why is it a 4? Is there appropriate justification? Are they really performing there? And the same question could be for the blue district. Are they really performing at that 3, and is there justification for that? So the next one we did is we went back, again, the same firm. This is the same firm for all of this data. And we went to a single district and pulled scores for all firm PMs for that single district. And the results were very interesting. Keep in mind, this is a data for, it could be CNI, survey, PS&E, schematics. It's for all across the board for a single firm. And so the data is interesting. So it goes as low as 2.7. And I'm wondering, okay, is that 2.7 justified? Is there a lot of data behind that? Is there a lot of examples behind that? Because that's not a great score. But then on the flip side, there's a 4.5. So is there justification for that? So they're always, anytime you leave that 3 mark, you want to make sure that there's justification. So anyways, that was just an interesting data pool.
Okay, so continuing on, you know, as you can see, there's a discrepancy in that data in the sense of there's not a standard approach that is happening out there. So to further go through, we thought, well, how does TxDOT assure that is being fair? And really, I know that y'all have the training that y'all put together, but more so, you and I talked about this from a district-to-district perspective. So how is it that you're working that through on your side and making that happen?
So in Dallas, we have a pretty strict process for evaluations, and one of the most important things, which I've been talking about, is putting those comments in there and making sure that your score, if it varies from, even if it is a 3, if it varies anywhere from a 3, you need to make sure you have the justification in there, in those comments and examples, just like you would do for an employee evaluation. You want it to be a conversation between the PM, TxDOT PM and the consultant PM, and it needs to be good feedback so that they know where they're performing well in or if they're not performing well. And so that's the first step after you've already set those expectations during the evaluation process. And so also there's also a concurrence approval process basically. So anything, any evaluations that occur in my purview I see every one of them. So on any given week, I'm probably looking at between 5 and 10 evaluations coming across my desk. And so I'm looking at them to make sure that there's justifications, that there's comments, there's examples. If those numbers are greater than 2 or greater than 3 or less than 3, then I'm asking questions. I'm not changing grades. I'm asking questions. Are you sure? Why is this? And I'm asking for that information. Sometimes I'll meet with the PMs or I'll meet with the supervisors. But those PMs have to have their supervisor's initials, and then they have to come to me for final concurrence. And if a score is very, very low or very, very high, then I go ahead and let my district engineer know, just in case, especially on the low end, in case he gets a phone call, because that has happened. So this is also wrapped up in our SOP as well, so to make sure that there's consistency in my section. And the same thing happens over Director of Construction and Director of Operations, and any evaluations that occur under their purview, they have to concur with those scores. And again, I'm not changing any grades, but I'm asking questions.
Okay, so one of the, you know, as I worked with Lacey on this, some of the questions that came up in talking to some of the consultants out there and working through the details, one was, is really who are we pleasing? A lot of times as consultants, we are asked by many supervisors within the TxDOT district, but we only have one reviewer. So really the question is who does make that final decision, and how is that controlled through that TxDOT process as that evaluation is going through? Because we all realize how important it is that we're pleasing the right people and really pleasing all the people, but really addressing the comments of one. So with that, Lacey, can you kind of give us an understanding of that approach?
Sure. So I would say you're pleasing the project manager because they're the ones who are actually going to be completing your evaluation. But you're also pleasing the district, right? Because if you're doing a design plan or you're doing survey, then every other stage of development is going to see that deliverable, and then they're going to construct it. And so every single piece of what we do is going to be seen. And so you're really pleasing the district, but upon your evaluation, you're pleasing that project manager. And so you need to set those expectations and ask those questions early on. But those decisions with that project manager need oversight, and that's why we have that concurrence chain of command to make sure that there's oversight in these evaluations. To my knowledge, there's nothing statewide that aligns Dallas with Houston or Dallas with Paris or wherever. But I would encourage those at the district level to create your own SOP so that you have consistency amongst your district at least. And then what happens outside of that are conversations that TP&D directors need to have and DEs need to have amongst themselves to make sure that we align across the board.
Okay, so working through some other questions that we had, how do we work through those questionable evaluations? Again, these are becoming more and more important, and getting through that process, and how do we deal with the issues of a questionable ranking, and where do we go, and how do we take it up the line if we need to? So that, Lacey, if you could explain.
Sure. So it always starts with your PM, of course. You need to have a sit-down conversation with the PM. If you don't agree with the evaluation, then go through criteria by criteria by criteria, and ask those questions and understand. And if maybe the PM missed something, and maybe you did do something, we'll bring that to the table, just like an employee evaluation would. You're bringing those justifications to the table to make sure that they didn't forget that you did this or you did that. And then that TxDOT PM needs to be equally prepared on the other end to justify the grade or the score that was given. And then if you're still not pleased, then there is a chain of command, just like the concurrence chain of command in the process that we have. You can go to the PM supervisor. You can come to me as a TP&D director. And if you're still not pleased, then I have a boss. We all have bosses. And there's a chain of command, and then at the end of the day, there is an actual appeals process that PEPS has. If it really comes to that point, we hope that it never has to go to that point, because there should be constructive conversations to have everybody on the same page about that performance.
And one item that we did talk about that is with some of my PMs, I actually will sit down with them and try to understand those expectations up front. And it's very helpful, you that are on the PMs for the TxDOT side and the PM, if you're asking those questions from the consultant side, is what are your expectations and what are your hot buttons so we can better understand it. And I think that communication is very key to what we're doing. For sure. Now, of course, recovering from a bad evaluation, in some cases these can be detrimental to selection. So is there a recovery process? And we talked about this extensively on how to move through that. So Lacey, you want to talk about what y'all do or what y'all have been seeing?
Yep. So the first thing is you need to schedule follow-up with your project manager, and you need to understand why you failed to perform, or where did you fall short from his perspective or her perspective. Ask, how do you improve? What steps can you take to make sure that you meet those expectations? And take another look at the schedule, at the fee, and at the scope, and make sure that you understand exactly what you need to deliver. And then there's also another way is what we can do as project managers, we can set up intermediate milestones, kind of like a PIP, right? A performance improvement plan. And so set those intermediate milestones and get those frequent deliverables, and then you can just do an evaluation as frequently as you want and bring that average up if in fact that firm PM is improving their performance. And so help them get that score up by doing that. So you can do that as well. And just as a reminder, I believe PM scores stay for 4 years. I could be wrong on that, but I think it's those scores stay for 4 years, and so that average is a 4-year running average.
Correct. Okay, sometimes we have those PMs on our consultant side that are not performing very well and they decide to leave, and they leave us with a bag full of mess is really what it is. And so really this one addresses that question is what do you do when a PM leaves, and how do you work through the details of that issue in the sense of performance as well as the firm performance. So if you could talk a little bit about that part.
Sure. So just as a reminder, a PM score stays with the PM. So when you do an evaluation, you have a PM criteria and then you have firm criteria. And when that gets pulled out, there's a lot of math on the back end, and then scores apply to procurement in a different way. And so the firm score stays with the firm, the PM score stays with the PM. So when a PM departs from a firm, that score is broken, and that score for the PM follows that PM. And then when you get a new PM, that whatever score they had before comes with that PM. So that might be a conversation you need to have with new hires as to what is your firm average, right? What is your PM average right now in PS CAMs? And so just making sure that and then do an evaluation when that PM leaves, and set those expectations with the new PM, and have the conversation with the firm about where their current score is and how that PM affected that firm score. And then you're starting from scratch at that point under a whole new evaluation with a new PM.
All right, I think the key to that is, at least from the consultant side, is be sure you get that evaluation done after the departure of that old PM and make sure that happens. This was an issue, and really we threw this in the mix because the question used to come up a lot, and now I think it's been fixed somewhat when you look at the last procurement. But the question really came up of staff members and our younger staff. How are we going to get them evaluated and get that information together for them so that they can compete on projects? And in the old system that really wasn't a good method, but now I believe that method came together by coming up with a weighted score for them in the process. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So new PMs, they fall in line with the median PM score, which is going to move. Okay, it's going to move all the time, but currently it's hovering around the 4 mark. And so when you have a new PM that's never been evaluated, they're going to be assigned that average PM score. So it's not always going to be a 4. It could be a 3. It could be 5. I don't know where it's going to land, but 4 seems to be a pretty good average. But most importantly, during procurement, we can actually change the weight. So if we're looking for a star performer and we're going to hold heavy weight on that PM, we're going to weight that higher. But if we're not so concerned with that, then we'll weight it low. So we get to kind of change that expectation in the procurement through that weight process.
Lacey, what is our max and the high end and the low end?
5 to 10.
5 to 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So everything that we've talked about today, we can create an SOP for that, right? We have SOPs for everything. And so Dallas, we created an SOP pretty early on for this process because we knew such a large district, we have so many people doing evaluations, we needed to get a handle on it quick. And so this is just a quick snapshot of our SOP. So it wraps up some links, very useful links for our PMs to go to really understand the evaluation process and the criteria. And then it outlines the purpose, of course, and then it talks about how frequently you need to be doing those evaluations. And we do hold our PMs very responsible for this as a part of their employee evaluation to make sure that they're doing these. And then there's an explanation of the submittal process as well, and that chain of command is discussed as well. And then under the miscellaneous section, it talks about how you facilitate that conversation and if things don't align with you and the PM, and how to handle that. And so I definitely encourage districts that don't have this to do something similar to establish those expectations within your district and across your directors and the supervisors across the entire district. Okay, so we had a poll. Can you guys pull up the results of that poll? Okay. So the question was, if I can remember, they had a submittal. It was late, but it was complete. And these are the results. So late, it was like 7 days late, almost a week late, but it was a fully incomplete package. And so 43% of you guys scored them satisfactory 3, and then 38% surprisingly scored a 2, which is pretty good. And 6% of you said that they were a 4. So a 4 being above satisfactory is okay if they're 7 days late. So you kind of have to ask yourself that question. But we just wanted to bring everything into perspective and show some results on what this would look like.
What's interesting about this, though, it kind of sheds light on even the data that you saw that Lacey presented on the variance in scores between the PMs. Obviously, there's a discrepancy because we saw in some instances about 1.5 point variance in there, and that's kind of showing about the same thing. So that's interesting. We didn't know what we'd get on a result with this when we did it with you, but
Yeah, so in Dallas, if they had submitted 7 days late and it was to no fault of the district's PM, then we would probably land on a 2 because you're 7 days late, but you're complete, but you're still a 2. But there are other criteria that we could pull up due to the quality of the submittal. So every criteria is very important.